Hello, everybody, and welcome to another version of Get to Know the HPO, our weekly Facebook Live series. My name is Abigail Richardson-Schulte, and I'm composer in residence with the HPO. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by our principal second violinist, Bethany Bergman. And feel free to comment and ask questions along the way. Today, we're going to start with a performance. Bethany will perform the Sarabande from Johann Sebastian Bach's Partita No. 2 in D minor. Please welcome Bethany Bergman. That was beautiful. That particular piece was written in a very creative, overly creative period for Bach when he started a new position with Prince Leopold in Curtin. And he had a lot more freedom to write what he wanted to. And he wrote a lot of secular works in this time, including these works for solo violin. And as an interesting thing, he started this position in some controversy. He left his previous position from the Duke of Weimar, where he was vice Kapellmeister, wanted to be Kapellmeister, wasn't promoted, and so he sought out this position of Kapellmeister anyway and elsewhere. And so he was imprisoned by the Duke of Weimar because in those days, musicians were very much treated like employees. And he went to jail for almost a month for seeking out this other position without the Duke's permission. And so he worked for Prince Leopold and had all of this creative freedom. So, Bethany, thank you so much. That was beautiful. Now your violin just sounds great. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, actually, I bought that violin in the last couple of years. For many years, I played on a violin that was very well suited to Bach. It was from around 1750, a Flemish violin. And while I love that violin, I found after some time playing so much modern music and so much in the opera and in the pit that it was becoming difficult, especially when the opera company moved to the Four Seasons Center. It became drier and the temperature fluctuated more, and it's a sensitive instrument. So I found this violin a couple of years ago, which is a very big departure from my old instrument. It was made in 1975 by a violin maker named Sergio Pereson. Many of his instruments are now played in the New York area and Philadelphia. He was from Udine, Italy. Then he moved to Venezuela. Then Menig's shop in Philadelphia found him. And he worked there for a number of years where he got to see some of the greatest instruments and started to model his instruments on those. Um, what's really remarkable is that he managed to capture some of that sound quality from the old instruments. And some of his most famous instruments are actually cellos. So, in fact, Jacqueline Dupre had one of his cellos, and she recorded the Elgar cello concerto on that. She loved the Pereson even after having a Strad. So,
Wow.
yeah. So he made some incredible instruments. Uh, Usually between 1970 and 1980 is sort of the sweet spot for those violins. And it's taken me a while to get to know it, but it's very responsive. I can play a variety of colors that maybe I couldn't always do. So,
And it seems very well suited to Baroque music.
oddly enough, this is the first time I've ever played Bach on it. Um, so it does, but what it is it's responsive and I can play light and it just kind of comes right off the instrument. So I appreciate that. Um,
Now, I've heard that all of your siblings are musicians. Did your parents put you into lessons when you were young?
no, actually, my parents, they both came from Manhattan. They did not have musical backgrounds. What they did was they just sent us to school, and they fill out those forms in school. Would you like to play an instrument? And the legend is that my oldest sister, Roxanne, filled out violin, violin, and violin for her first three choices. So they gave her a violin. And so she came home and loved the violin and wanted to play it. There was no violin in our house. We didn't really go to concerts, but there was a love of music from my father and my mother too. But my father really loved music, so she took lessons in the school, and they said, "Well, she's getting very good very fast, so you'll have to get her a private teacher." And my mom found a student from one of the conservatories near us, which was New York, and was hoping to get lessons for all of us. But what happened is my second sister wanted to play violin too, and my mom tried to convince her to play a different instrument, and she wouldn't. So when she figured out that there was going to be more than one child playing, she she just got a teacher for both of them. And then the third sister came and she wanted to play violin, and she sort of gave in. And so the oldest one sort of taught the third one, and the second one, Glenda, taught my brother to a certain extent. And then my first teacher was actually my sister, Helene. So we all, for better or for worse, sort of taught each other and all became professional violinists.
That's amazing. So, how many siblings do you have again? That seems like a lot.
I have four siblings. Um, so my oldest sister started the whole thing, and they offered music in the public school. And at the time, they gave lessons in the public school, like group lessons that were, like 2 or 3 people at a time. We had a full-time strings teacher at my elementary school, which was amazing.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes, in fact, if I remember correctly, there were 2 orchestras. I think there was like a younger orchestra and a second orchestra. And I even tried playing the cello when I was in elementary school, even though I already played the violin, because they were just offering these lessons basically for free. It was amazing, actually. It was amazing. They had a full-time band teacher, a full-time orchestra teacher. Apparently we have to leave and come back.
Okay, we will be right back. Sorry about this, everybody.
How do we do that? His most famous piece is The Four Seasons, which and duo and violinist case is played by Zina on the cello. Interlude, a courant, which is a kind of dance, then a little interlude, and then another G.
Okay, we're back again. Sorry about that. We lost each other, but I'm glad we're able to carry on the conversation here. So you mentioned, Bethany, that your sister then was your first teacher. I guess outside of school, your first private teacher. We actually have a picture of Bethany and her sister. Can we get that up there? There we are. Lovely.
So she was my first teacher. I started lessons right before I started first grade. Actually, I didn't start in the school. She just started teaching me right away. I still remember my sisters, who were all older than me, and my brother, like looking for a little violin and bringing it home. I remember opening it up and being incredibly excited about it, that I actually got a violin. I think I just expected that everybody in the world played the violin as the youngest child. So she taught me. I remember my first violin lesson standing up right next to her bed. She was just a teenager and she was teaching me how to play. And at a certain point, she went and got her master's at the Manhattan School of Music, and she would bring all of her notes from her teacher, Bronstein, back to me as a little kid. And I would also listen to her practice. So I think that was very instructive in its own way. Yeah, it was pretty neat.
That's interesting. So music was just a way of life for your family. Now, did all of your siblings become professional musicians?
So all of us studied to become professional violinists. 4 of us actually are professional violinists. One of my sisters had to stop early on because she had an injury, and it would have been quite difficult to keep going, but she still plays. So in the picture of all of us playing, she is playing. She plays, she's in the green shirt to the right and the jeans. She still plays. She plays violin and viola. Her children play violin and piano, and her son plays cello. Her daughter plays violin. They're adults now, but they still play music. But the 4 of us are professional violinists.
That's incredible. And where do they live and play?
So my sister Roxanne lives in New York. Her husband is a bass player, and they freelance in New York City and the area. And my sister Helene lives in Brooklyn with her husband, who's a trumpet player, like my husband. He's a jazz trumpet player. And she has a private violin studio in Brooklyn and also freelances. She has, at this point, she's quite the teacher and has over 20, 25, I don't know how many students she has. It's a lot of students. And my brother Jason lives in Vermont, And in Vermont, he has started. There he is. I call him the Pied Piper. He's very dynamic and an incredible teacher, very inspiring. So he teaches at the St. Johnsbury Academy, but he also has started a STEMA program in Vermont, St. Johnsbury, Vermont. And this program is really wonderful for the community there. He also plays in the community orchestras and he conducts, but really he's an incredible fiddle player. So he can play all styles, and he plays with a bunch of bands, and he plays at festivals in the summer. And he's just like one of those sort of all around great musicians and really fun to be around.
Wow, amazing. So it sounds like all your siblings married musicians.
Yeah.
So you had no choice. You had to marry a musician. Now, for those of you that don't know, Bethany is married to Michael Fedician, who is our principal trumpet at the HPO. So there we go. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Now, how did your parents feel about all of you studying music and becoming musicians?
So they were not overly enthusiastic about it as a career choice. So while we studied it, we all had to take a different field of study at the same time. So my sisters, I hope I'm not going to be corrected on this. They'll text me later if I'm wrong, but I think all three of them did music education. And my brother did some kind of music business, sort of side major. And I have a double degree in music and English literature.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
Yeah. So in Bloomington, so when I was looking for schools, Indiana University Bloomington's where I went, and they had a really great academic as well as music program. So it was one of the reasons I chose going to that school. It's a fantastic music school, but it also had, very strong academic program, and really encourages to take academic courses as well.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that your dad had a love of music, but also in our discussion, it came up that his signature is on the moon. What's that all about?
So my dad was part of the GI Bill that would pay for veterans to come back and go to school. So he studied engineering at the Pratt Institute, and he got a job at Grumman Aerospace right before they started working on the lunar module. And he was part of that, working at Grumman, and was, I think, very exciting. Obviously, it was before I was born, but I got to hear legends about this time. And he was very proud of being a part of that project. So he loved engineering. He loved airplanes and all things that flew. So that was part of our history. Now he's there on the moon.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. Now, in your training, it strikes me that you have done a lot of training and been part of so many different organizations along the way, not just schools, but ensembles. Can you talk us through a little bit your training, how you started off in the States and then ended up in Germany, and then we'll get to Canada after that. So how did you end up going to Germany, and what did you do there?
So I went to Germany because circumstances sort of prevented me from taking all my graduate auditions for conservatories in the United States after I finished my degree in Bloomington. And I went and I went to Schleswig-Holstein Music Festival in the middle of the summer. And I just decided to stay in Germany, and I auditioned for conservatories there. At the time, I had a friend who was helping me. So I stayed. And first, I lived in Munich. I got a position in the Hochschule there, which was amazing. And I did the Orchestra Academy there, which at the time was, you auditioned, and then you got to play with the chamber orchestra, the Bavarian Radio Symphony. Some people played with the Philharmonic, but I was never available then. So I, I did that, and then I met a violin teacher from Berlin. So I really loved his teaching. That was in East Berlin. So I auditioned for the Radio Symphony in Berlin, the Deutsche Symphony Orchestra. And I got a practicant position, which was like a apprentice. It was a stipend. Every month they gave me a stipend, and I would play with the orchestra. And then I studied in the Hochschule in East Berlin. So I did that for a year, and then I subbed with them as well. So that was a couple of years in Berlin. And then I had a position for somebody who was pregnant in a Gewandhaus orchestra. So I was playing part-time in Gewandhaus as well towards the end of my stay in Germany.
That's incredible. Must have been quite an experience. Now, do you speak German?
Now I do. When I went, it was a bit of a leap of faith, and I learned German pretty much while I was there. I took some courses at the beginning, but once I went to East Germany, I really just had to learn it because nobody spoke English at the time. It was not long after the wall came down, and most of East Germany, especially in the Hochschule, and my violin teacher did not speak English. And also I needed it when I was in orchestra rehearsals and when I was listening to master classes or other lectures. And, you just sort of learn it because you have to. So
Right.
I learned, and I'm glad I learned how to speak German. I don't get to use it as often as I would like, but I can still speak German, more or less.
Good for you. I married a German, and so I go to German classes every Saturday. I have been going now for quite a while, probably 6 or 7 years, I think. And even though people can speak English in Germany, like for the most part, when they're together, they don't, right? And so I felt very left out, and so I try my best at German. I'm not there yet. I'm better at reading it than I am at picking it up with fast talkers. But anyway, so you picked it up and had to live in that world. It sounds quite exciting, and
Yeah.
I'm very impressed. You played with the Gewandhaus Orchestra as well. That's incredible. So Bethany, how did you end up coming to Canada, and why?
So I had been in Germany for 4 years, and actually I had planned on going to either Vienna or London after that. I hadn't planned on coming back to North America. I don't know, maybe ever. I wasn't sure. I loved living in Europe. I loved, living in Germany. But I went to a master class in Preshikov, England, which really was life-changing. It was like maybe 3 of the best weeks of my life. 2 10-day classes. It was incredible.
Wow.
It's this idyllic location in England, like off the coast of Cornwall, England. And it's just this intensive experience for musicians. And I went to take master classes with Gerhard Schultz, who was the second violinist of the Alban Berg Quartet, and also with Laurent Fennevesh. I met them both there. And I loved Mr. Fennevesh, and he said, I'd like you to come to Canada to study with me. And I had never thought of coming to Canada to study. It hadn't occurred to me. And I just sort of said, okay. And I packed up my bags and I moved to Toronto.
Wow. Oh, there he is. There's a picture of him.
Yeah.
Great.
I loved him.
Now, he must have been quite something for you to make that huge move and coming from Germany. So tell us a little about him as a teacher. I know among string players, he's legendary and taught for decades at University of Toronto. Before that, I believe he was in Switzerland, and then he had a position with the Palestine Orchestra. It seems like he knew everybody and a lot about them, and was really able to share that with his students. But I'd be interested in your experiences with him.
um, Mr. Fenivesh was an incredibly wise person. And I think that if you were drawn to that wisdom, you could get a lot from his teaching. Um, because he didn't teach violin in a sort of systematic way. He really catered his teaching to the individual and often had somewhat uncomfortable insights into your process when you worked, your process when you thought about music, when you performed, and in your whole life. And sometimes that was hard because you had to really reflect on what you were doing. But there isn't a day when I practice or play the violin that in some way he isn't still sort of with me. I remember when I first started studying with him, one of the things he said was, if you don't listen to you, why should anybody else? Uh, which was, of course, very insightful. So I really appreciated his teaching. And I studied with him for 2 years. Towards the end of my second year, I got the job in the opera. But after I played in the opera for a number of years, I actually went back to school while I was working and got my master's with him as my teacher, because I wanted to have as many years with him as possible. So I didn't want to study with him to get a job. I wanted to study with him to really absorb what it is that he had to offer. And I felt that the 2 years wasn't enough. And unfortunately, he passed away during my second year of my master's.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So who did you end up studying with then?
I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now, Bethany? No.
Should I just start again?
Oh, can you hear me now, Bethany? Oh, there we go. We have Larry Pakin has a comment here. Hamilton's Martin Beaver also studied with Mr. Fenivesh. Absolutely. Well, we're going to answer a couple of questions that have come up here, but we'll do that, I think, after we watch a video. So Bethany recently performed with her daughter in a porch concert. And Bethany, we're going to hear or watch this video of you playing with your daughter now in front of your home and performing a Vivaldi piece. So do you want to set this up for us?
Sure. So we have a very supportive neighborhood. As you can imagine, there's actually a lot of music going on in my part of the city. There's a regular concert that happens it's every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday night. Actually, Mike's been participating in that with some brass players. And we've had, the occasional thing in my neighborhood as well. So one of my neighbors wanted to have a real concert, and this was on Father's Day. So my neighbor, Sarah Fulford, offered her home, which has a nice lawn in front of it. And I came up with a program involving some solo violin, but I also thought it would be fun to involve my daughter, Alexina, who is becoming a cellist that I can play with, which is wonderful. So this was our first concert together.
Amazing. So let's watch this video now. This is Vivaldi's Violin Sonata in D minor for violin and continuo. And there are 3 movements of this: courant, adagio, and gigue.
collaborated with many different kinds of musicians on different projects. One project he did, I think it was in the early 90s, was an album called Appalachia Waltz, which is a trio. Oh, do you want to do that? No, that's fine. I'm sorry. So, which is a trio for violin, cello, and bass. The cellist being Yo-Yo Ma, the violinist is Mark O'Connor, and the bass player is Edgar Meyer. And it's an album of compositions attributed to melodies and inspirations from North America, United States, and Canadian traditional music. Zena and I are going to play that as a duet, but before we play that, she is going to play a solo cello piece by Rachmaninoff, a romantic composer, and it's normally a song which has been taken by many instruments, and it's called a vocalise. So here is Abigail.
Oh, there we go. We heard a little bit of Alexina playing that Rachmaninoff vocalise. Sorry, we're having some technical troubles today. Well, Bethany, that was fabulous, and such good Baroque style in that Vivaldi. That was great to hear. Now, tell us about your daughter. She's very, very talented. How old is she, and who is she studying with?
Alexina. So we have two daughters, Alexina and Ruby. Alexina is 12, and she plays piano and cello. She has a particular love for the cello. I suspect that's what she's going to stick with. Her teacher is Juan Kim, who teaches at the Royal Conservatory of Music. And she is, I don't know, she's perfect. Her teacher is a perfect person. She's wonderful. She's a wonderful teacher. She's a great mentor. She's a great human being. And she's incredibly supportive and has been a great guide for Alexina's development. I would say that she gets a lot from her piano teacher as well, who is Monique Demargerie, wonderful pianist. And Ruby takes piano as well from Monique. And Ruby has been taking violin on and off with me, among others, but it, like COVID, keeps getting interrupted. So I think she is also probably going to stick more to piano, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, it makes sense as two professional musicians, as parents, that you would try to find the best teachers and the best fit. And those teachers, especially in the early years, are so important. We have some lovely comments for you from people that watched your performance. Nancy Nelson writes, "Wonderful. You and Mike must be so proud of Alexina's great accomplishments." Absolutely. Kate Morrison writes, "Wonderful," with exclamation marks. Stephanie Laporte gives some applause. James Somerville writes, "Bravi." There we are. So that's really nice. Now, a while ago, Bethany, one of our watchers here, who's a very important audience member for us, comes to so many of our community events as well, Daryl Dockstader, had a question for you. And he writes, "The fine arts reach the soul faster than any of the STEM fields ever will. The greater the divisions in society, the greater the need for our souls to connect." Wondered if you had a comment on that.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think that our brains function best when they're feeling creative and when they're feeling inspired, and when we can be the best of ourselves, which is what hopefully, I mean, not to get over philosophical, but hopefully in the arts, that's what we're encouraged to do, is become the best version of ourselves, not only as individuals, but within our community. So when we perform, it's a way of bringing everybody together and sharing an experience. and also sharing a common emotion, common feelings that are so important for us to work together and go forward.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's so nice that you're able to do that at this time as well, like your porch concert demonstrates. So that was very special. Just as a side note, I thought it was interesting how if you didn't know it was happening in a city, you could almost imagine those traffic sounds as being like the ocean. So I found it very, very, very peaceful and lovely. Now let's move on to your position at the HPO. Now, a few weeks ago, we had your husband, Michael Fedishin, on this series, on this live stream, and he told us that the two of you actually met in Hamilton at another organization, and then later both got these principal positions at the HPO. So that's pretty incredible. So when did you join the HPO?
I actually joined the HPO in 2007 while I was pregnant with Alexina. I think I was 6 months pregnant. Jamie might remember because he was at my audition. I don't actually remember, but I know I was pregnant, and I remember that the very last thing I did was play an HPO concert about a day or so before I had her. Before we had Alexina. So it was quite exciting to be playing with the HPO that season. And actually that same season in 2008, I actually was able to play solo with the HPO. I played Havanace on one of the concerts at the invitation, once again, of Jamie Somerville, who was very, very supportive and a great director. So that was really fun that I got to suddenly play in this orchestra and play with Mike, and that began my relationship with the Hamilton Philharmonic.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, and by the way, for those of you watching, we had Jamie Somerville and Neil Spaulding and Jesse Brooks on this series last week. So we'll post a link to that. That was really fun. So Bethany, you've been involved with the orchestra then for what, 13 years. How have you seen it change in that time?
Well, I have seen the orchestra grow. I mean, obviously there have been changes in directors and changes in personnel, but what I see is this amazing continuum of a desire to grow, to reach out more to the community, and to refine what we already do, both together and individually. And I love playing with my colleagues in the orchestra. It's an exceptional group of people on a musical as well as a personal level. They are incredibly funny, innovative, enthusiastic, supportive, and generous people who have really risen to the occasion of working together to build this organization.
Yeah, oh, that's really lovely to hear. It always strikes me that there's such well, as you mentioned, sort of collaboration and great spirit with the orchestra. So many orchestras have difficulties with each other. There are issues, there's gossip, there's, it can be a little bit negative, but it seems like the HPO is just a very happy place and people want to be there and play together. So that's really nice. Just as a follow-up on that here, Nancy Nelson, who plays second oboe, writes, "Miss you, Bethany," and a little tear. Well, there we are. That says it all. Thank you, Nancy. Now, I'm always interested in the different levels of artistic leadership in an orchestra. I mean, of course, we have the music director, we have the conductor who may or may not be the music director of the day, we have the concert master, then we have all of the principal positions. Now, you are principal second with the HPO. what do you think, how does principal second violin play into the whole orchestral fabric?
Um, well, sometimes when I'm feeling frustrated, I say it's like being monkey in the middle, because I never know who to follow. Do I follow I tend to follow the first violins and the concertmaster, I would say, like, most of the time. But then sometimes I really have to work with the viola section or with the cello section if we have parts together. So I feel like what's the fun challenge of being in that position is having your feelers up for where you fit in and which part of the motor you're running. We're often a very rhythmic part of the orchestra, and I really enjoy that. I feel like individually that's a stronger part of my playing is rhythmically, so I enjoy being able to really understand what's happening. um, and I also play principal second in esprit orchestra, where of course that's contemporary music. That's always very important to have a strong understanding of rhythm and where within complicated and complex rhythms you fit in.
Yeah, that's thank you for that answer. That makes a lot of sense. And so you mentioned that you play at Esprit Orchestra. Where else do you play?
I also play in the Canadian Opera Company Orchestra. So that was the position I got when I was still studying. I took it towards the end of my artist diploma program at the Glenn Gould School, the conservatory. And I was very lucky to win that audition. That was in 1999. Yes, 1999. It was shortly before I met Mike, actually. When I came to Toronto, when I came to Canada, just as an aside, I sort of decided pretty quickly that this was the best of all worlds. That this is it. This is like where I wanted to stay. It was I loved being here, and I loved everything Canada had to offer. So I made a real effort to win a position so I could stay in Canada. So I got that in 1999, and then freelanced for a while. But I have a tenured position in the Opera Company Orchestra, the first violin section, and it's been a great experience. I have excellent colleagues in my section.
Yeah, okay, interesting. So you're playing first violin there. Okay, I've got it straight. Now, I wonder if there is much of a difference in being on stage or in the pit, as it were, as an opera player versus being on stage with an orchestra, and also the difference in rehearsing and performing. Is there a lot more rehearsal that goes into an opera, for example?
Yeah, there is. I mean, our rehearsals are always 3 hours long, first of all, but also our parts are very dense. The music is very dense. So we always have three solid rehearsals before the singers join us. And then we usually have, four rehearsals once the singers join us, before we even begin to think of performing. So it's the scores are usually very complicated. Every once in a while you'll get something that's a little lighter, but opera writing is dense and complicated, full of notes. I often have a part that's 100 pages long, as a violinist,
That's
and
awful.
especially when we do Wagner. Oh boy, that's a
Oh.
lot of notes. It's a lot of notes. Although I do love playing Wagner violinistically, it's really fun. But it's really it's a lot of work. But the thing that's really different about playing in the opera is when you perform, obviously you're not on stage, but it's also a performance that's going to happen more than once or even more than twice. And I feel as though I got lucky because if you try and to keep it interesting, you really want to make every performance better. So you have an opportunity every night to get better at what you did the night before. You have an opportunity to learn a lot from what you did before. And I really appreciate that. You also have to be incredibly flexible. That
Mm.
is, you don't just go when you play opera. Like you go when the conductor says to go, but you don't have big passages where it's just the violins playing. That doesn't happen. It's always part of, a larger organism. And um, I really appreciate that as an opera player, I've needed to learn to be really sensitive to everything going on around me, not only in the orchestra and when I look at the conductor, but also on stage. And to nuances that maybe I wouldn't have learned about as a solo or chamber player. So I find that both challenging and interesting.
Hmm. No, that's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that you have to be very responsive because, of course, the conductor is trying to be responsive to the singers. That the singers really are the primary focus, so they can take their time when they want to, which means the conductor is holding back and holding back the whole orchestra. So I can see that it needs to be really flexible like that. Now, you mentioned that you can sometimes see things on stage. Can you see the singers when you're in the pit?
Sometimes. It depends. It depends on where I'm sitting, and it depends on how much I have to look at my music. But it also depends on how close they are to the front of the stage. There have been some operas where I can just hear them, but I can't see them, um, which is, somewhat frustrating. But we have some pretty amazing singers, and their voices carry quite far, and we always hear them. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what about playing in the pit versus playing on stage? Does that impact you? Does that matter to you?
Yeah, it does. Um, I love what I do, like the music when I play in the pit, but I do really love playing on stage. I enjoy the performance and I enjoy instrumentally and otherwise connecting with the audience more
Ah,
than we have a chance to in the pit. I think that's what I miss the most. I think if there was a way for us to really be connecting with the audience more, I would enjoy playing in the pit. But I love our stage performances and I love the excitement of that.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Um, Now, just to be clear for people watching, I want to just touch on the amount of rehearsals because you mentioned it quite quickly. So you might have, I think, 3 rehearsals with the orchestra before the singers would join, and then 4 rehearsals with the singers, and then you'd have many, repeat performances of that. Now, in the orchestral world, we tend to have 4 rehearsals, unless it's a pop show where there might just be 1 or 2 rehearsals, right? So very, very tight. And then often just 1 performance. That's our the way we usually do it at the HPO. And then sometimes a second performance. So yeah, that just to put that in perspective, there that there's a lot more preparation and time playing in an opera. And some of you might not know that many of our HPO players are actually, well, a good number of our HPO players are actually in the COC orchestra. So our personnel manager tries to coordinate schedule so that even when we're planning our season, we can make sure that we're not missing some of our key players because of the COC orchestra. Now, we're almost out of time here, but if any of you have any final questions or comments for Bethany, now is the time. And she will play one more piece before the end of today's session. So it's while she's playing, you can feel free to ask a final question or comment. But Bethany, you're going to play now "When You Wish Upon a Star." Can you tell us about this and tell us about the arrangement?
So I actually arranged this song for our porch concert um, because there's not a lot of not too serious music for violin that I know of. I suspect I'm going to be learning more about solo violin repertoire as this situation continues, but I also wanted to play something that was sort of lighter and hopeful, and I really like the message of this song, which is, if you if we try, if we wish about it, not that it will come true, but that we can send out what we believe, and maybe we can do something about the things that we feel are difficult or more frustrating for us at this time.
Mm, beautiful introduction. Thank you. Okay, we'll let you go and get set up. So Bethany, as she mentioned, will perform When You Wish Upon a Star. This was written by Lee Harline and Ned Washington for the Walt Disney 1940 version of Pinocchio. So here is Bethany's own arrangement. Wow, thanks, Bethany. That's interesting. It was almost like a classical cadenza version of When You Wish Upon a Star. I heard all of those little classical figurations in there. So well done. Nice arranging.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been so interesting to hear a little bit about your life as a performer and your musical family and what it means to play with the HPO. So thank you very much for that. For all of those of you watching, I hope you'll join us next week. This will be a special garden edition of Get to Know the HPO. We will be speaking with our development staff member Lennox Toppin, and we'll get a tour of his Strathcona area garden. And while we're looking at gardens, I'll also show my own garden. I live in a Dundas penthouse with some pretty interesting roof gardens. So that'll be a fun day. And for those of you that would like to send in your own picture of your garden, we would love that. And we'll show some of them on our stream next week. So we'll provide a link for you to do that. So before we leave you, Bethany, just a few comments here from the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra. What a beautiful performance. Thank you, Bethany. And Pat Dickinson enjoyed Bethany's playing and her philosophy of life. Lovely thank you from Elaine Galbraith Atkins. So really, very much enjoyed. Thank you very much, Bethany. And we hope to see all of you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.